in obscurity, but he brought the entire world to the brink of disaster. His name became synonymous with evil, redefining the meaning of hatred. Many call him a demon in human form, using the mystic arts to control the destiny of millions. He was Adolf Hitler.
Beyond what is known lies an unexplored world of shadows and phantoms. A land that knows no limits of time or space. From the dawn of discovery to the nightfall of catastrophe. Journey to a universe of the unexplained, the unforeseen, the unbelievable. A place beyond reality where no question will go unanswered. A place where myth and legend are law, superstition a science.
It's time for our journey to begin. He twisted a nation around his crooked cross, enfolding them inside his nightmare. His name, Adolf Hitler. Knowledge surrounds these library walls, and with these instruments, that knowledge can be ours. Adolf Hitler has become one of the best-known historical figures of this century. His brutal reign of power in Germany, his domination of most of Europe, his terrible crimes against the innocent, are all part of our recent history. What is not so well known is how Hitler used powers of the occult to grab and hold the minds of millions, many of whom followed him into the grave. 10 days after his 56th birthday, Adolf Hitler ended his life. Around him, the last embers of Nazi Germany still glowed. In just 6 years, Hitler had laid waste to Europe. Yet only a few years earlier, millions had considered him a savior, a hero of almost mythic proportions. It is hard to imagine that such a man existed, but he did.
Hitler was the greatest mover and shaker of the 20th century. By that, I don't say he's a great man. But all those of my age, for example, had their lives changed by Adolf Hitler.
He was a product of an age, a product of a century, perhaps, a product of 10 centuries. There probably won't be another man like him for the next 10 centuries, and thank God we can say.
The tremendous human quality, if you want to call it a quality, that Hitler had along with other great leaders was willpower. His willpower was tremendous.
And his timing was always wonderful. He had a sense of sizing up his opponents, seeing their weak qualities and taking advantage of it. So all these factors, I think, add up to explaining why this real nut took power of a great civilized country.
There was little in Hitler's childhood to indicate what was to lie ahead, for he dreamed only of being an artist. And when his father died, he set out to Vienna to live out his dream. It was in Vienna that the seeds would be sown that would bring forth such a bitter crop in his later life. In Vienna. The years that Adolf Hitler spent in Vienna from 1907 to 1913 forever marked his life. He went there a callow youth, and left an embittered fanatic. Little is known about the young Hitler's life in that Austrian city. We must go back and see that life for ourselves. Ready?
One moment. There. The portal is set for Vienna, Austria. It's 11:30 in the evening of December 18th, 1908. You're going to Feldstrasse 22, apartment 12, and in that apartment...
You'll be there.
Yes, but remember, you cannot change history. You can only observe. He will not see you, but you will see him. Oh, wait, you'll need this.
Yes.
The apartment is quite cold. He can't afford to heat the flat.
Thank you. I won't be long. In this cramped apartment, the boy who would become the most feared man in the world worked and dreamed. Hitler never realized his goal of becoming an artist, but he railed at the stupidity of those who found his work stiff, lifeless. Hitler had a feverish intensity that would never desert him, and his waking hours were filled with dreams and demons which would haunt him throughout his life. It was in Vienna that Hitler would cultivate his pathological hatred of the Jews, and through anti-Semitic literature of the time, he would begin to form his doctrine of destruction, of extermination. It was at this time, in this place, that Adolf Hitler and history would begin to move toward their fatal rendezvous, here in Vienna.
How long was I gone?
About 3 hours, 23 minutes. What were your impressions?
Even then he was filled with hate. World War I was the crucible where that hate would be cast into a lethal weapon. Hitler was recovering from a poison gas attack when Germany abruptly surrendered. He told an army psychiatrist that he had experienced a supernatural vision that told him it was up to him to lead Germany back to its glorious past. For an unknown army corporal to entertain such ambitions is astounding. To achieve it in 15 years is staggering.
He had this faith in himself, this little voice that assured him that he was on the right track. He never wavered in his belief that he was going to upturn the world.
I think Hitler believed in his own destiny. He was destined by fate to lead Germany to become the dominant power in the world. And in the end, it was a total belief that he was the greatest man of his time.
The relationship between coincidence and destiny is ambiguous. Hitler's path to power was paved with events that almost defy belief. The case of the wrong man appearing at precisely the right time.
There's a French term, Vabonspiel, the fellow who goes for broke, or the American idiom would be the crap game, the man who keeps throwing sevens. And Hitler threw an awful lot of sevens.
You wonder what about his luck. He managed to turn disasters into positive things.
I'm not a determinist. I don't believe even today that he was bound to lose. But gamblers tend in the end to die broke, and Hitler certainly did.
I often go on bitter nights to Wotan's Oak, in the quiet glade with dark powers, to weave a union. The runic letters the moon makes with its magic spell. Hitler wrote those words from the trenches in World War I. And weave a union he did, using a symbol that would come to haunt the world. Surprisingly enough, the swastika can be found in many different cultures, over many different centuries. It was no coincidence that Hitler personally chose the swastika, for like most of the outward trappings of Nazism, That symbol touched a repressed chord in many who beheld it, a pagan, mystical chord. Hitler wanted to make sure that his party would be associated with superstition, terror, and he achieved his goal. The colors of his flag are telling, a bloody red with a circle white as a human skull, and at the heart, the crooked darkness, the swastika. The almost demonic power of Hitler has been much commented on by historians. A closer look at how Hitler acquired these powers may just unlock the riddle of how one man could come so close to enslaving much of Europe, and why he failed. Hitler came to power during the late 1920s and early 30s. He was assisted by a rogues gallery of men, many of whom were fanatic believers in the mystic arts. Adolf Hitler was familiar with this occult world as well. This man, Rudolf Hess, was Hitler's right hand during his rise to power. He was also a dedicated occultist and follower of a man named Dietrich Eckart. Hitler had met Eckart in 1919, and under his tutelage, his speaking abilities increased dramatically. Many who witnessed the transformation swore that Hitler had the gift of hypnotizing the masses.
Hitler was probably the most hypnotic speaker of his era, perhaps of all time.
He had great powers of connecting with people, of communication. And there's no doubt at all that his rise was due more to his oratory than any other single thing. We corresponded, would sit at a Hitler speech, and we would say to ourselves, or whisper to each other, well, a lot of nonsense this is. It's a bunch of rubbish. And you look around the hall, and the German people would be sitting there with their mouths open and their eyes blazing.
Hitler soon cast his spell over Germany. Using his instinctive flair for pageant, he and his henchmen brought back the Dark Ages, figuratively and literally. Curiously, this Dark Age of the German spirit had been anticipated, perhaps prophesied, a few decades earlier. In 1896, an English author, M.P. Shiel, wrote a novel about a band of murderers who roamed throughout Europe, exterminating, then cremating anyone who got in their way. Shiel called his book The SS. Though Hitler never read it, this terrible prophecy came to pass as the Schutzstaffel, or SS, helped Hitler tighten his iron grip on so much of Europe. Heinrich Himmler, the leader of the SS, was obsessed with the occult. He conducted strange research programs into Germany's mystical past and sent his SS on bizarre missions to acquire mystic talismans, including, legend has it, the lost Ark of the Covenant.
I'm quite certain that Heinrich Himmler, the chief of the SS, must have taken a close interest in the occult. The evidence for this would be the whole of the makeup of the SS, its mystic cult, the ancient runic symbols, the candlelit ceremonies that rather reminiscent of the Druid ceremonies at Stonehenge, this kind of thing. I think he certainly learned from the powers of all the broad spectrum of the occult, from the powers of evil and darkness at one end, right through to the ultraviolet end of the spectrum. And Hitler learned from all these vast religious and pseudo-religious movements, the kind of movement which defies analysis. We can't explain why it succeeds, and yet it does.
Frau Troost, the widow of the great architect Troost, later became Hitler's architect. She told us that one day Hitler said, you know, I have escaped death a number of times, but he said, you know, it was not luck. A little voice warned me, and I would just take that action. Well, he believed in this little voice up to the end, and then the little voice disappeared.
On June 21st, 1941, Hitler's luck began to change. On that day, he invaded the Soviet Union. Surprisingly, it was the stars that betrayed him. An astrological mistake that was the beginning of the end for the Third Reich. Adolf Hitler was a gambler. He gambled callously with the lives of millions and with history. As with any gambler, his luck eventually had to run out. And in 1941, his fortunes began to change. The Nazis' faith in the occult led them into catastrophe in early 1941, when a group of astrologers working within the SS proclaimed with complete confidence that the winter of 1941 to 42 would be an unusually mild one. Armed with that guarantee and his overwhelming belief in his destiny, Hitler launched his invasion of the Soviet Union. That summer soon melted into fall and then winter, a bitterly cold winter.
What happened was, unfortunately for Russia and the opponents of Hitler, it was the most severe winter in Russia in, 40, 50 years.
By the time that he was about to storm Moscow, he found that he had run out of summer. The rains turned into sleet, the sleet turned into snow and ice, minus 20, 30, 40 degrees. The tanks froze solid, the gunpowder didn't explode anymore, it just fizzed, it just squibbed. And Adolf Hitler, in fact, had overreached himself. He had taken the curves too fast.
That was when his luck ran out, began to run out. And from that time, it was all downhill.
This debacle would doom the Third Reich. Hitler's rash declaration of war upon the United States would also ensure his early defeat. The same blind belief in his luck that led him to victory would now hurry him to catastrophe. And in the summer of 1944, as the Allies tightened their grip around the Nazi Empire, a group of German generals realized that Hitler had to go. The plot involved the placement of a bomb in Hitler's East Prussian headquarters. It seemed that at last his luck had run out.
I interviewed 7 people who were sitting around the table when Hitler was being briefed. And the man who was talking to Hitler at the time told me he saw this colonel put in a briefcase next to Hitler, except it was on the opposite side of a post. Unfortunately, he put it on the wrong side or Hitler would have been killed. Somehow, something, his destiny or whatever it was, prevented this. I don't know what it was.
Like some demonic character from the Wagner operas he loved so much, it almost seemed that Hitler was ordained to lead his nation into oblivion. But as April of 1945 began, a fantastic prophecy was fulfilled, a prophecy that the Nazis thought would ensure their salvation. Joseph Goebbels' astrologers assured him that in mid-April of 1945, fortune would turn in the Nazis' favor. Precisely as predicted, that prophecy came to pass, with consequences that still affect our lives today. As the Allied armies closed the noose on Berlin in 1945, news was brought to Hitler's bunker. An ecstatic Goebbels told his Führer that his prophecy had come to pass. His arch-enemy, Franklin Roosevelt, was dead. The Nazis rejoiced. Surely now the Americans would lose their will to fight. As in so many things, they were terribly wrong. The new president, Harry Truman, was equally dedicated to the destruction of the Nazi Empire, and 2 weeks later, Adolf Hitler shot himself, his 1,000-year Reich in flames around him.
He was a man who had the lives of millions of people as his responsibility, and also who was responsible for having taken the lives of millions of people.
He actually believed the world would thank him for killing the Jews. He maintained this fallacy throughout his life, but his effect on the world was indelible and will remain so as long as we have people that read books.
Adolf Hitler's life lasted 56 years. Those years saw the world transformed into a new and terrifying landscape. He was in some ways an actor, skillfully playing to the worst impulses of his global audience. Fortunately, the curtain rang down upon him and his theatre of insanity, but not before millions had paid with their lives. Adolf Hitler, a demon in human form. His terrible legacy must never be forgotten.
Secrets and Mysteries presents information based in part on theories and opinions, some of which are controversial. The producer's purpose is not to validate any side of an issue, but through the use of actualities and dramatic recreation, relate a possible answer, but not the only answer, to this material.